The transport ship descended through the orange clouds of Kethsora, and Commander Lissa Vance pressed her face against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. But what waited below was nothing like snow and nothing like anything she had prepared herself. For during the 6-month journey from Earth, the Valkyrie Military Academy spread across the rocky moon like a wound in the earth. All black metal towers and training arenas carved into the mountainside. And somewhere down there, young aliens were learning how to kill before they learned how to read. Lissa checked her uniform one more time and tried to steady her breathing. Because she knew what the Valkyrie thought of humans, and she knew this assignment was either a great honor or a death sentence. Dressed up in diplomatic language, you will observe, and nothing more. Admiral Chun had told her before departure. The alliance is fragile, and they agreed to let one human witness their cub training program as a gesture of trust. So do not speak unless spoken to, and do not interfere no matter what you see. She had nodded and saluted and pretended she was not terrified. The landing platform groaned under the ship, and when the doors opened, the cold air hit Lissa like a punch to the chest. But the cold was nothing compared to what waited for her at the bottom of the ramp. 3 Valkyrie stood in formation, and they were exactly as the briefing files had described. Standing over 7 feet tall with silver fur that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light, and yellow eyes that tracked her every movement with the patience of predators who had never known what it meant to be prey. Their claws retracted for now, but still visible as dark curves beneath their fingertips. The one in the center stepped forward, and his voice came out as a growl shaped into words. I am Senior Instructor Vorak Tith, and you are the human observer. It was not a question. Commander Lissa Vance, she said, and extended her hand in greeting bud. Vorak Tith only stared at it like she had offered him something dead. You will follow, and you will not touch the cubs, and you will not speak to the cubs, and you will sit where we place you, he said, and turned without waiting for her response. The Dominion agreed to your presence, but we did not agree to tolerate your interference. Lissa lowered her hand and followed. The walk through the academy took nearly an hour, and every Valkyrie they passed stopped to stare at her. Some with curiosity, but most with something closer to disgust. And she heard whispers in their growling language that her translator implant rendered as words like small and soft and plaything. She kept her eyes forward and her back straight, because showing fear to predators was never wise. The training arena was massive and carved directly into the heart of the mountain, with stone seats rising up around a central pit where she could see equipment that looked designed for combat. And the seats were already filling with young Valkyrie cubs. They were smaller than the adults, but still larger than Lissa. Maybe 4 feet tall with the same silver fur, but softer and fluffier. Their claws not yet fully grown, and their fangs still coming in. And despite everything in the briefing files about their violent culture, Lissa felt something twist in her chest because they looked like children. Because they were children. Vorak Tith pointed to the very back row of the arena, the seats furthest from the action and closest to the exit. You will sit there, and you will watch, and you will not move until training concludes. Lissa climbed the stone steps and took her seat and tried to make herself small. The training began, and it was everything she had feared. Cubs barely old enough to be in school thrown against each other in combat exercises, while instructors shouted criticism and never praise. Young bodies hitting the ground hard and getting up harder because staying down meant punishment. And through it all, Lissa sat with her hands clenched in her lap and her jaw tight. She was not allowed to interfere. A cub near the front took a bad hit and cried out, and Vorak Tith descended on him with fury in his yellow eyes. Weakness, the instructor snarled. Pain is nothing, and crying is for prey. Are you prey? No, Senior Instructor, the cub whimpered. Then get up and fight, or I will give you something real to cry about." The cub got up and fought, and Lissa tasted blood in her mouth from biting her tongue. Hours passed, and the training grew more brutal, and Lissa began to understand why the Volturi were feared across the galaxy. Because they raised their young in blood and pain and called it love. And by the time the session ended, she felt hollowed out, but then something unexpected happened. As the cubs filed out of the arena, one of them looked up at her. A small male with darker fur than the others and wide golden eyes. And instead of disgust or fear in his gaze, there was something else: curiosity. He stared at her for a long moment, and Lissa did something she probably should not have done. She smiled. The cub's ears perked forward, and his tail gave a single involuntary wag before he caught himself and hurried after the others. But at the doorway, he looked back one more time, and Lissa could have sworn she saw the beginning of a smile on his muzzle too. "Karth," one of the other cubs called. "Stop staring at the weird creature and come on." The cub named Karth disappeared through the door, and Lissa was left alone in the empty arena with the echoes of violence still ringing off the stone. While she had been told not to interact with the cubs, she had been told not to interfere. But as she sat there, in the back row of that cold arena on a moon far from Earth, Lissa Vance made a quiet decision that she told no one about. Not Admiral Chun, and not the Velthari commanders, and not even herself. In so many words, these children deserved better, and maybe there was nothing she could do about it, and maybe she was just one small human in a galaxy that saw her species as prey. But she was here now, and she was watching, and sometimes that was where change began with someone willing to see. She stood and walked out of the arena, and somewhere in the halls, a cub named Karath was thinking about the strange creature who had smiled at him. The first smile he had received from any adult since he could remember. And neither of them knew yet what that small moment would grow into. But seeds do not know they are seeds either, and still they grow. 3 weeks passed on Kethsora, and Lissa learned the rhythm of the academy like a prisoner learns the rhythm of their cell. Waking before dawn and walking the cold halls to the Fulgadung arena and sitting in her back row seat while the cubs trained and bled and learned that pain was the only teacher worth listening to. But something was changing. It started with Kurath, the dark-furred cub who had looked at her on that first day. And at first, it was just glances during rest periods, when the instructors allowed the cubs to drink water and catch their breath. Quick looks over his shoulder to see if the strange human was still there. She was always still there. Then one day, during rest period, Karath did not just look. He walked toward her seat and stopped at the bottom of the stone steps and stared up at her with those wide golden eyes. "You are very small," he said. Lissa almost laughed, but she held it in because laughing might draw attention from the instructors. "I am," she whispered back. "Humans are smaller than Velthari. Do you have claws?" "No." "Fangs?" "No." Karath tilted his head like he was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. "How do you fight?" "We find other ways." The cubs seemed to consider this, and then a whistle sounded across the arena, and he had to run back to training. But the next day he came back with more questions, and the day after that he brought a friend. A female cub named Senna, who was even smaller than the others and who flinched at loud noises. "Senna wants to know if humans have fur." Kurath said, "We have hair," Lissa said and pointed to her head. "But only up here mostly." "That seems cold," Senna said in a voice barely above a whisper. "It is sometimes." The cubs stared at her with something like wonder, and Lissa felt her heart doing something dangerous in her chest. Something that felt like attachment. More cubs came over the following days, curious about the creature in the back row, who did not yell at them or strike them when they asked questions. And Lissa learned their names one by one. Karath and Senna and Vaughn and Tresca and all the others. 12 cubs in total, who slowly migrated toward her corner of the arena during every rest period. She asked them about their training, and they told her everything with the openness of children who had never been taught that adults might actually care. Today we practiced with the shock staffs, Vaughn told her one afternoon and showed her a burn mark on his arm. I blocked 3 hits before I fell. 3 hits is very good. Lissa said. Vaughn froze, and his ears went flat against his head. What? 3 hits. That is impressive for your age. You should be proud. The cub stared at her like she had spoken in a language his translator could not process. Adults do not say things like that, he said. What do adults say? They say we should have blocked 4. They say 3 is weakness. They say we will die in real combat if we cannot do better. Liza felt that familiar tightness in her jaw, but she kept her voice soft. Well, I think 3 is good, and I think you worked hard, and I think you will get better every day. Vaughn looked at the other cubs, and they looked back at him, and something passed between them that Lissa did not fully understand. But when the whistle called them back to training, Vaughn walked a little taller than before. Cubs began showing her all their wounds after that. Cuts and bruises and burns worn like medals. And Lissa reacted to each one with concern that confused them. Does it not please you? Senna asked one day, holding up an arm covered in claw marks from a sparring match. I won the fight. I am glad you won, Lissa said. But I'm also sorry you were hurt. Those look painful. Pain is nothing. Pain is something. It tells you that your body needs care. Does anyone treat your wounds after training? The cubs looked at each other. We treat our own wounds, Kuris said. Asking for help is weakness? Lissa wanted to scream, but instead she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small medical kit she had started carrying, and she gestured for Senna to come closer. May I? Senna looked at the others and then climbed the steps and held out her arm. And Lissa cleaned the wounds and applied healing gel with gentle hands while the other cubs watched in silence. Why are you doing this? Senna asked, because someone should. That night in her quarters, Lissa wrote a report to Admiral Chun that said everything was proceeding normally and the alliance remained stable. And she did not mention the cubs at all because she knew that what she was doing broke. Every rule they had given her she did not care. The cubs needed someone to care about them, and she was the only one willing to do it. But not everyone was blind to what was happening. Senior Instructor Varak Tith had been watching, his yellow eyes tracking the cubs as they drifted toward the human during rest periods. And rage had been building in his chest like a storm waiting to break. They're becoming soft, he snarled to the other instructors one evening. The human is poisoning them with prey weakness. They seek her approval instead of fearing our judgment. She is just sitting there. Another instructor said, what harm can she do? You do not see it because you do not understand humans. They are parasites of emotion. They burrow into hearts and make the strong weak. I have seen it before on the border worlds where humans settled near our outposts. Our soldiers started showing mercy to enemies, started questioning orders, started caring about things that did not matter. He slammed his fist against the table. I will petition High Command to remove her. But High Command denied his petition because the alliance with Earth was too important, and the humans had insisted on an observer, and politics mattered more than the concerns of one instructor. Varak Tith received the denial with cold fury. If High Command would not remove the human, then he would find another way, a way that looked like an accident, a way that taught the cubs what happened when they forgot their place in the order of predator and prey. He began to plan, and in the arena Lissa sat in her back row seat, surrounded by cubs who had never known kindness and who were learning for the first time that strength did not have to mean cruelty. And she had no idea that danger was circling closer with every passing day. She only knew that when Karath smiled at her with his 2 sharp fangs showing. Her heart felt full in a way it had not felt since leaving Earth. These children were not hers, but they were becoming hers anyway. And that was the most human thing of all. The day of the combat examination arrived with cold wind howling through the mountain passes, and Lissa felt dread sitting heavy in her stomach as she took her seat in the back row, because she had heard the cubs talking about this day for weeks. And she knew what it meant. Every cub had to fight a training drone alone in front of the entire academy. Instructors and observers and even representatives from high command who had traveled to witness the next generation of Velthari. Warriors proved their worth. Failure meant shame. Failure meant punishment. Failure meant being declared unfit for the Dominion. Lissa watched the cubs file into the arena, and she saw fear on their faces that they were trying to hide. Young predators who had been taught that fear itself was the enemy. And when Kurith looked up at her, she gave him the smallest nod she could manage. "You can do this," she tried to say with her eyes. "I believe in you." The examinations began, and one by one the cubs entered the pit to face the drones. Metal constructs designed to fight at varying difficulty levels, depending on the age and skill of the opponent. And some cubs did well while others struggled, and a few were beaten so badly they had to be carried out, but they were not declared failures because they had fought to the end. Fighting to the end was what mattered. Kirith's turn came, and Lissa held her breath as he squared off against his drone. And the fight was brutal and messy, and at one point he took a hit that sent him spinning to the ground. But he got up again and again until finally he landed a strike that disabled the machine. The instructors nodded and marked something on their tablets, and Kurith climbed out of the pit with blood running down his face and a look of exhausted pride. And when he glanced at Lissa, she let herself smile and saw his tail wag just once before he controlled it. Then Senna's name was called. The small female cub walked toward the pit with her ears flat and her tail tucked, and Lissa could see her trembling from across the arena. This cub who flinched at loud noises and who had confessed to Lissa in whispered conversations that she did not like fighting, that she would rather study the stars than learn to kill the drone, activated, and Senna raised her claws, and then it charged. She froze the drone, hit her full force, and she went down hard and did not get up. Not because she was injured, but because her body would not move. Her muscles locked in terror while the machine circled back for another strike. "Get up." Vorak Tith roared from the instructor platform. "Get up and fight, you worthless creature." But Senna could not get up. Drone hit her again, and this time she curled into a ball and covered her head, and the examination was over. Guards deactivated the drone and pulled Senna from the pit, and she stood there in the center of the arena floor, covered in dirt and oil and her own blood, shaking so hard that Lissa could see it from the back road. The silence in the arena was worse than any noise. Of Vorak Tith descended from the platform with slow, deliberate steps, and the crowd parted for him like water. And when he reached Senna, he stood over her with disgust, twisting his features into something ugly, pathetic. He said, and his voice carried through the arena because he wanted everyone to hear, "You are not worthy of the Dominion. You froze like prey. You cowered like the weak thing you are." Senna made a small sound that might have been a sob. "Look at me when I speak to you." The cub raised her eyes, and they were wet with tears. She was trying desperately not to shed. "You have shamed yourself, and you have shamed your bloodline, and you have shamed everyone who wasted time training you." Vorak Tith continued, "I should have known from the beginning that you were defective, that you would never be anything but prey wearing the fur of a predator." Senna's shoulders began to shake. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" The cub opened her mouth, but no words came out. Just a choked breath that sounded like her heart breaking. Lissa was moving before she made the conscious decision to move. She stood up from her seat and walked down the stone steps and crossed the arena floor with every eye in the place tracking her. Instructors and cubs and high command, representatives all staring at the small human who had just broken every rule she had been given. "Stop," she said, and her voice did not shake even though her hands did. Varric Tith turned to look at her with shock that quickly became rage. You dare? She is a child, Lissa said, and kept walking until she reached Senna, and then she knelt down so she was at eye level with the cub. She is a child, and she froze because fear is natural, and she deserves comfort, not cruelty. She deserves nothing. She failed. Lissa ignored him and focused on Senna, on those wet golden eyes that were staring at her with desperate confusion. Listen to me, Lissa said softly. Freezing does not make you broken. Fear does not make you weak. Everyone feels fear. Even the bravest warriors feel fear. The only difference is that brave warriors feel the fear and keep going anyway. And you can learn to do that. You will learn to do that. But today you were scared, and that is okay. No, Varric Tith snarled. That is not okay. Fear is weakness, and weakness is death, and you are teaching her lies. He grabbed Lissa's arm and yanked her to her feet with enough force to make her cry out. You do not belong here, human. You were told to observe and nothing more. You have violated the terms of your presence, and I will see you removed from this academy. Then remove me, Lissa said, and she looked up at him without flinching, even though his claws were pressing into her arm, hard enough to draw blood. But I will not stand by and watch you destroy a child for being afraid. The arena had gone completely silent. No one spoke to an instructor that way. No one defied the natural order of predator and prey. Lissa turned back to Senna. One more time. You are not worthless, she said. You are not a failure. You are a child who had a hard day, and that is all. And tomorrow you will try again, and you will get better. Do you understand? Senna nodded slowly, tears still running down her fur. I understand, she whispered at Varric Tith. Release Lissa with a shove that nearly sent her to the ground. Get back to your seat, human. We will discuss your violation later. Lissa walked back across the arena floor and climbed the stone steps and sat down in her back row seat. And she could feel the rage radiating from Varric Tith like heat from a fire. And she knew that she had just made an enemy who would not forget or forgive. But she also saw the cubs looking at her differently now. Not just with curiosity, but with something deeper, something that looked almost like devotion. She had stood up for one of them. She had defied an instructor, defied the entire system that told them they were only worth what they could fight. No adult had ever done that before the examination continued, but Lissa barely registered it, because her mind was racing with what would come next, with the consequences of her actions, with the very real possibility that she would be sent back to Earth in disgrace, and these cubs would be left alone again. But when she looked at Senna sitting with the other cubs, when she saw Karth put a gentle paw on the smaller cub's shoulder, when she saw them all clustered together in a way that looked almost protective, she knew she had made the right choice. Some things were worth the consequences, and these children were worth everything. The summons came the following morning, while Lissa was still in her quarters. A formal notice on her tablet, demanding her presence in Training Chamber 7 for what was called a special observation session. With the cubs, the message was signed by Senior Instructor Varric Tith. Every instinct Lissa had screamed that something was wrong. She thought about refusing, about contacting Admiral Chun, about requesting an escort from the Volthree security forces. But she knew that none of those options would work because she was a guest in hostile territory, and her status as diplomatic observer was already hanging by a thread. After yesterday's, she went Training Chamber 7, was on the lowest level of the academy, carved deep into the mountain where the rock walls were thick enough to muffle any sound. And when Lissa arrived, the cubs were already there, waiting for her with expressions that shifted between confusion and concern. Karth ran to her immediately. Lissa, something is wrong, he said in a whispered rush. Instructor Varric Tith told us this was special training, but he would not say what kind. And he made us leave our practice weapons behind. and I do not like the way he was looking at us." Before Lissa could respond, the chamber door slammed shut behind her with a sound like a death sentence. Voractith stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the room. "Good," he said. "Everyone is here." The cubs clustered together, and Lissa moved to stand between them and the instructor, because whatever was about to happen, she would not let these children face it alone. "What is this about?" she asked, and was proud that her voice stayed steady. "This is about correcting a mistake," Voractith said, and began walking toward them with slow, predatory steps. "You have poisoned these cubs with your human weakness. You have taught them to value softness over strength, comfort over discipline, and I have watched them become something shameful under your influence. I have taught them that someone cares about them. That is the problem." He stopped about 10 feet away, and Lissa saw that his claws were fully extended, curved blades of black bone that gleamed in the dim lighting. And she understood with terrible clarity what was about to happen. "You cannot do this," she said. "The Alliance will survive the unfortunate accident of a human observer who wandered into a training exercise and was killed by a malfunctioning drone." Voractith interrupted. "The cubs will confirm the story because they know what happens to witnesses who speak against instructors. And High Command will offer condolences, and the Alliance will continue because politics matter more than one dead human. The cubs will not lie for you. They will do what they are told, because that is what they have been trained to do." He looked past Lissa at the 12 young faces watching with growing terror. "You will witness this, and you will learn an important lesson. The lesson that prey is prey, no matter how much you might come to care for it. The lesson that attachment is weakness, and weakness gets you killed. The lesson that the Dominion has survived for 10,000 years by raising warriors who feel nothing for the things they destroy." "We will not," Kureth said. The words came out small but fierce, and Voracteth's eyes snapped to the dark-furred cub with dangerous intensity. "What did you say?" "I said we will not," Kureth repeated, and he stepped forward to stand beside Lissa. "She is our friend, and we will not let you hurt her, and we will not lie about what you did. Foolish child. You think you can defy me?" "Yes." Senna moved to stand on Lissa's other side, trembling but present. "Yes," she said, then Vaughn and Tresca and all the others. 12 cubs forming a wall between Lissa and the instructor, who had made their lives hell since the day they arrived at the Academy. Voractith looked at them with something that might have been disbelief if it were not so quickly overtaken by fury. "So be it," he said. "I will deal with you. After I deal with the human, I will call it a training accident. All of you dead because you were too weak to survive. High Command will be disappointed, but they will not investigate too deeply because cubs die in training all the time." He lunged. Lissa raised her arms to shield herself because that was all she could do. She had no claws and no fangs and no combat. Training in Voractith was a predator who had been killing for longer than she had been alive, but he never reached Herkarath intercepted. The blow the cub was half the instructor's size, but he moved with speed born of desperation, and his claws caught Voracteth's arm and tore through fur and muscle, and the instructor roared in pain and shock as dark blood splattered the stone floor. "You dare!" Voractith screamed. Then Senna was on him, the cub who had frozen during her examination now attacking with wild fury, her teeth sinking into his leg while her claws raked at whatever she could reach. Them, all of them 12 cubs, descended on the instructor like a storm of fur and fangs and claws, not with trained technique but with raw, desperate fury. The fury of children who had finally found something worth protecting and who would die before they let it be taken from them. Voractith fought back, and he was stronger than any one of them. He threw cubs across the room and left bleeding wounds on any who came within reach, but they kept coming back, kept attacking, kept throwing themselves at him with complete disregard for their own safety. Lissa watched in horror and awe as the cubs she had read bedtime stories to, the cubs she had bandaged wounds for, the cubs who had asked her why humans had no claws, tore into their tormentor with a savagery she had not known they possessed. Vorak Tith went down under the weight of their numbers. He did not get up to sounds of violence, faded into heavy breathing, and when the cubs finally stepped back, their silver fur was matted with blood, both their own and his, and they stood over the body of the instructor with wide eyes and shaking limbs. Then they turned to Lissa, and she saw fear on their faces. Not fear of what they had done, but fear of what she would think. Fear that she would look at them and see monsters. Fear that they had become exactly what Varaktith had always told them they were. Lissa opened her arms. "Come here," she said. Kareth made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a sob, and then he was pressed against her. And Senna was there too, and all the others. 12 bloodied cubs clinging to one small human in the dim light of a chamber that smelled like death. "You saved me," Lissa whispered. "You brave, wonderful children. You saved me. Are you angry?" Kareth asked against her shoulder. "No. Are you scared of us?" "Never." She held them tighter and let them shake and cry and process what they had done. Because they were still children, even if they had just killed to protect her. And children needed comfort, especially in moments like this. "What happens now?" Senna asked. Lissa looked at the sealed door and the disabled cameras that Varaktith had no doubt shut off before beginning his plan, and she felt the weight of what came next settling on her shoulders. "Now we tell the truth," she said. "And we hope that someone is willing to listen." She did not know if that hope would be enough, but these cubs had fought for her. The least she could do was fight for them. The tribunal chamber was carved from black stone that seemed to swallow light, and the seats rose in steep tiers, like the inside of a throat waiting to swallow whoever stood at the bottom. And that was exactly where Alyssa found herself standing, with 12 cubs huddled behind her. The high elders of the Velthari Dominion sat in the highest tier, ancient creatures with fur gone gray, and eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, and they looked down at the scene before them with expressions that gave nothing away. "The charges are severe," the eldest of them said, a female named Korath Vel, whose voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. 12 cubs stand accused of murdering a senior instructor, an offense punishable by death under Dominion law. Lissa felt Korath pressed closer against her back. "The cubs acted in defense of my life," she said. "Varaktith intended to kill me and make it look like an accident. He said so himself before he attacked. The human's word is not evidence." One of the other elders growled. "She has motive to lie. The cubs are her responsibility now, and she would say anything to save them. The cubs are not my responsibility. They are yours, and you have failed them." The chamber went silent. No one spoke to the high elders that way no one had ever dared. "Explain yourself, human," Korath Vel said with dangerous calm. "These children have been raised in cruelty, taught that kindness is weakness, and that pain is the only teacher. They have never known what it feels like to be valued for anything other than their ability to fight. And when one adult finally showed them basic compassion, when one adult finally told them they mattered, they were willing to die to protect that adult." She stepped forward and looked up at the tiers of ancient faces. "Does that sound like weakness to you?" "It sounds like contamination," another elder said. "Our cubs do not form attachments to outsiders. They do not protect prey creatures. What you have done is unnatural. What I have done is treat children like children." I remembered their names. I asked about their days. I told them they did well when they worked hard. I cleaned their wounds and let them know that someone cared if they hurt. These are not advanced techniques. These are not weapons. This is simply what it means to be decent. She turned and looked at the cubs, and in return they gave me something your 10,000 years of warrior culture has never produced. They gave me loyalty, real loyalty, not the obedience of fear, but the devotion of love. They fought their own instructor, someone they had been trained to never defy, because they valued me more than they feared him. This proves our point. The growling elder said, "They've been corrupted. They have forgotten their place in the natural order." "No," Lissa said. "They have found their place. They have found something worth fighting for beyond orders and fear, and that makes them more dangerous than any warrior you have ever trained." "Not less." Korthvel raised a hand and the chamber fell silent again. "You speak with conviction, human. But conviction is not evidence. You claim Vorak Tith intended murder. You claim the cubs acted in defense, but there were no witnesses, and the cameras were disabled." "There was one witness," Lissa said. "Me." She reached up and tapped the corner of her eye. "I have a cybernetic implant. Standard issue for military personnel. It records everything I see. Vorak Tith did not know about it because humans do not advertise our technology to species who might become enemies." The chamber erupted in murmurs. "I request permission to submit my visual records as evidence." Korthvel considered for a long moment and then nodded. "Granted." A technician came forward and connected to Lissa's implant. And moments later, the chamber's viewing screens came to life with footage from the training chamber. Vorak Teth's voice echoing through the tribunal as he laid out his plan to kill the human and blame it on an accident. His words about teaching the cubs a lesson. His lunge toward Lissa with claws extended. Elders watched in silence as the cubs defended her. When the footage ended, Korthvel's expression had changed. Not to warmth exactly, but to something more complicated. Something that might have been reluctant respect. "The evidence supports the human's account," she said. "Vorak Tith acted with murderous intent, and the cubs responded with appropriate force to protect an innocent life. They killed an instructor." The growling elder protested. "They killed a traitor who would have murdered a diplomatic guest and blamed it on training accidents. They killed someone who would have damaged the Alliance and brought human retaliation upon the Dominion. From a certain perspective, they are heroes." She looked down at Lissa and the cubs. "The charges are dismissed. The cubs acted in legitimate defense and will not face punishment." Lissa felt the tension drain from her body, and behind her she heard Senna make a small sound of relief. But Korthvel was not finished. "However," she said, "the council requires explanation. Cubs do not protect outsiders. Cubs do not defy superiors. In all our history, this has never happened. I would know what the human did to inspire such devotion." Lissa looked at Karth and Senna and all the others. These children who had become hers without either side planning it. "I treated them like they mattered," she said. The elder stared at her. "That is all?" "That is everything. Your culture raises warriors through fear and pain and isolation. It produces soldiers who obey because they are afraid not to. But humans learned long ago that there is a stronger bond. When someone knows they matter to you. When someone knows you will care for them and protect them and value them beyond their usefulness. They will do anything for you, not because they fear the consequences, but because they cannot bear to let you down." She looked back at the cubs. "I gave them something they had never had. Someone who cared about them as people, not as soldiers. And they responded by becoming the most loyal warriors this academy has ever produced. Warriors who would die for something they believe in." The chamber was quiet. Korthvel descended from her tier with slow, deliberate steps until she stood in front of Lissa, towering over the human with those ancient yellow eyes. "You are dangerous," she said. "I know. The Dominion has survived by raising warriors who feel nothing for outsiders. By keeping our soldiers hard and cold and obedient, and you have shown that there is another way. A way that produces loyalty we cannot match with fear." She looked at the cubs. "They would have died for you, all of them, without hesitation." "Yes, and you did not even ask them to." "I never would." Korthvel made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The council wishes to offer you a position. Not as an observer, but as a trainer. We want to understand this human bonding that turned frightened children into warriors, who would tear apart their own instructor to protect a stranger. Lissa blinked. You want me to stay? We want to learn. The alliance with Earth is more important than we realized, not because of your technology or your resources, but because of what you can teach us about ourselves. She turned and began walking back to her seat. Report to the main arena tomorrow. You will be assigned your own training group. We will see what the Dominion can become with a human helping to shape it. The tribunal was dismissed and Lissa walked out of the chamber with 12 cubs swarming around her, their tails wagging and their voices overlapping with excitement and relief and something that sounded like joy. You are staying. Kareth said. You are really staying. I am really staying. Does that mean we can still talk to you during rest periods? Lissa laughed, and it felt like the first real laugh she had managed since arriving on Kefsora. It means you can talk to me whenever you want. Senna grabbed her hand with gentle claws. We were so scared you would leave. I would never leave you. Not unless they dragged me away, and even then I would fight to come back. The cubs pressed closer, and Lissa let herself be surrounded by their warmth. By these children, who had chosen her as much as she had chosen them. The next morning she walked into the main arena and took her seat in the front row, not the back, and Kareth sat on one side of her and Senna sat on the other, their tails wagging as the new training group filed in. What will you teach them? Kareth asked. Lissa looked at the young faces staring at her with curiosity and suspicion. Cubs who had been told the same things Kareth and Senna had been told. That humans were weak, that kindness was prey behavior, that the only strength that mattered was the strength to kill. She smiled. I will teach them that someone cares about them, she said, and we will see what grows from there. Kareth's tail wagged faster. That sounds like a good lesson. It was, and across the stars the story began to spread. The story of the human who sat in the back row and changed everything. The story of the cubs who tore apart their instructor to protect a creature with no claws and no fangs. The story of love being stronger than fear. The Velthari called it contamination at first, but eventually they learned to call it something else. They learned to call it strength, and somewhere on a distant moon, a small human woman sat surrounded by children who had once been taught that caring was weakness, teaching them that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy was not claws or fangs or warships. It was kindness. It was connection. It was making someone feel like they mattered, and that was something humans had mastered long before they ever reached the stars.